I'm really thrilled to come here because this is such a prestigious institution, and you all have been just leaders in communication work, and so it's very exciting for me. I grew up in North Carolina, where I live now, but it was the world has changed a ton. So that now I'm doing tobacco control work, but I graduated from R.J. Reynolds High School. Believe it or not, because R.J. Reynolds was the big employer in the town of Winston-Salem, which is named after the cigarette brands. Winston and Salem were made there. When I was a kid, my mom smoked Salem cigarettes, and whenever we had out-of-town guests, we'd take them to the factory, and my mom would always say, grab all the Salem that you can buy when they let kids and everyone else grab all the free cigarettes at the end of the tour. So things have changed dramatically in the tobacco control world, and now I'm doing work. I mainly started doing the tobacco control work in my postdoc at the time that the California Tobacco Control Program was really getting started. It was funded through a Proposition 99, and I worked a little bit with June Flora, who many of you probably know as a communication scholar at the time at Stanford, and also Todd Rogers and Ellen Ferry. And so I've loved this work. I've stayed in it now for about 19 years. As I was meeting with the trainees this morning, we talked a bit about the ups and downs, because I felt like in tobacco policy and tobacco communication work, the golden age, we had the first golden age in 1994 when Clinton was president and Kessler asserted jurisdiction at the FDA, and we saw all this great stuff starting to happen. And then things kind of fell apart with the Supreme Court decision that the FDA didn't have authority over tobacco, with the Bush administration not supporting tobacco control efforts very much. And then it became really kind of some bleak, lean years in tobacco control. And then with the advent of the 2009 Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act has been just a major boon to people doing work in this area. So I think for a couple of reasons. One, there's just great new regulatory authority and things that are happening. But secondly, because of this user fee, where the tobacco companies are paying around $600 million a year now, and it escalates up to over 700, they're giving amazing resources to FDA, who in turn is giving resources to NIH, to other projects, and they're doing some unprecedented stuff. And I think the work, I've talked a lot with people here today, you all are doing work that's shaping what FDA is doing, including the major communication campaign that they're implementing, targeting youth and adults, and the work that all these TCORS centers are doing is really gonna shape what we're doing. So I wanted to talk to you about really just two areas that I'm really interested in trying to get more real world, trying to match sort of rigor and control with sort of real world research. The first study I'm going to talk about is how we test warnings on people's cigarette packs, how we decide which warnings to pick and which ones are going to be best. And it's a proof of principle study for an idea. We haven't done the large study, but I'll show you our plans for it if the idea is viable. And then secondly, I'll talk about some work on Google Insights for search that allows you to look at and do surveillance or monitoring of the types of search queries people are using online. If we happen to have, and there's a one that I just tucked in, has nothing to do with tobacco, about the Great Recession, just because I thought it was cool. And there's some optional content if we have time. I want to acknowledge some of the funding sources from NIH and CDC. I'm on the TPSAC, the Tobacco Product Scientific Advisory Committee, mandated by Congress, that advises FDA. I'm also a consultant to them, but I have no other financial conflicts related to this presentation. And then I want to acknowledge work that I've done with colleagues. Marissa Hall, in particular, is a doctoral student who's was very active along with my other colleagues on this warning label work. And then John Ayers, who's been the real leader in the Google search stuff. I'm the policy expert, and he is the Google search query expert. So you may be able to stump me with some esoteric questions about Google trends, but I know the sort of policy side pretty well. So we know that graphic cigarette warnings are becoming increasingly popular. Over 63 countries now mandate a graphic warning label on cigarette packages. And so states, 30 countries have a text one. And so a number of places are going from a text to a graphic. Some places are taking their graphic one and deciding, let's add new graphic ones. Let's refresh them, because they get stale, as you know, over time. And so given that there's great interest in these, and I'm not really going to talk about this here, but we have a meta-analysis that we're going to present at the TCORS meeting showing substantial superiority in almost every measure of graphic over text-based warnings. And intuitively, this is what everyone has thought, but the research really shows when you aggregate it, they're really, really much better. But how do you pick the best warnings? So let's think about evaluating warning labels. One line of research are these observational studies. And these are the type of studies where we collect some baseline data on the smoking rates. We have a label, we then now add, we have maybe a text label like on the American labels where they're on the side of the second smallest side of the pack. And now you add a big graphic warning label on maybe half the pack. And then you look, does that affect smoking rate? So these are these observational studies. They're interesting. They have great ecological validity. But they have there's so many other things happening like tax increases, marketing changes, and so forth. So they're really messy. You really don't have the internal validity. On the other hand, you have lab experiments. And this is where people sit people down in front of a computer. They'll show them a pack. They'll put labels on the pack, and candidate labels. And they'll ask people's reactions to it. So here you're able to show people either between groups or within groups design different types of labels, and you tend not to measure behavior. Here we had behavior, smoking prevalence. Now you're tending to ask them attitudinal questions. Does this scare you? So you're getting at perceived risk, or is it getting at, does this make you want to quit? And so forth. But you're not, we're looking for something that has really sort of the best of both worlds. It has some of the external validity and generalizability and a behavioral endpoint here, but also something that has some of the control there with the internal one. So if you think about a smoker, if you're a pack-a-day smoker, you're going to pull your pack out 20 times a day. This is why warning labels are, I just think, a fantastic tobacco control intervention because the industry pays for printing them. We don't, so underfunded, poor public health isn't paying it. Possibly, a pack-a-day smoker might see it 20 times a day. We know they're not going to pay attention to it every time. 7,000 times over a year, where will you ever get 7,000 free exposures from a message? So that's pretty good. However, when we're often doing these warning, the computer-based ones, we're sometimes showing people labels for 5 seconds, sometimes a minute, sometimes 2 minutes, versus this just constant exposure. And you all know from your message work, just simply showing something, one message one time, then expecting this big effect, and not really understanding what repeated exposure that's happening with real labels. We're missing out on that. So what we thought is, what if we could link a warning label with a meaningful dose. So instead of just 5, 10 seconds, actually show it to people for a longer amount of time, and also something that could be used in RCTs. And I just remembered I have props that I forgot. So I am, and all right. So I don't usually travel with cigarettes, but so yeah, you see like these are warnings, and many of you who do this work see it. Smoking harms you and people around you that you see from the UK. These are called kiddie packs because they have 10 that they're banned in the US. Then you see this is what's going on, with Australia, where they have the plain packs, where they have these pretty grisly images. They take 90% of the back of the pack, and then 50 to 60% of the front. So this is, this is what smokers are seeing. So our protocol is that we want to actually take a candidate warning label and put it on the smoker's actual pack, and then see how that works. And you could use it in randomized trials. And in fact, here's a mocked up pack that we used in our study, where you have a pack of Marlboro, and you see that we've taken one of the candidate FDA labels and we put it on there. When you actually get in to do this real world, you actually realize you have to take a razor and slice across so that the pack will open. Or you could put it on the bottom, which is not what FDA is planning on doing, but we put on the top. So we wanted to see, is this feasible to implement? Will smokers actually allow us to do this? Will they, how will this work, and so forth? So we wanted to do a pilot. Again, it's a pilot protocol. And we also wanted to see, is it going to change, collect pilot data on whether it could change attitudes. We thought it was just a small, underpowered study. It wasn't designed to test smoking rate differences, or even, we weren't even sure if we could actually get attitude change with as many people as we had. And we collected this data early, about a year ago, with a convenient sample. We jokingly call this our flagpole study, because at UNC, I think unlike Penn, we began smoking within 100 feet of all buildings. So people have only 1 or 2 places on campus they can smoke, and one is the flagpole in the center quad of campus, because it's like 100 feet from every building, and so the smokers all go to this flagpole, and it's awesome for study recruiting of smokers. So we sent our RAs out there every few days, and they would go until they began to see that they had found everyone. But we also recruited on other different places. So it's a convenient sample of people, not just college students, because we also did some in Carborough. There are, like normal smokers in the US, about 12 cigarettes per day, and a pretty high percent, 70% low income. So in the first appointment in this study design, we gave them a cash incentive of $80. We walked with them to our offices, from our offices to a tobacco retailer, which is actually a pharmacy. Again, we're one of the few countries in the world that actually allows cigarette sales at pharmacies. And they went and bought a week's supply of cigarettes. I'm sorry, 2 weeks supply of cigarettes. And then we labeled the packs with one of the 9. We randomly assigned them to get one of the 9 FDA labels. They kept the same label each time versus keep switching out the label. And then 2 weeks later, they came back. Every one of them returned back. We gave them $50, and we collected our follow-up measures, and then, which I'll show you in a minute, and then we referred them to a quit smoking program in case they were interested in quitting smoking. We wanted to see from our process measures, are they having high support? A priori, we thought if they had 80% or higher support for these, we felt that this indicated it was probably successful. So of the pack smoked, did they have the study's warning labels on them? We've tested some variations where we actually put the labels on for them, but it doesn't mean every time they're going to only smoke, because they sometimes bum cigarettes from friends. Other friends had packs, but we wanted to see the dose, so to speak. In another variation, we had them label their packs, but that didn't go as well, so we actually like to label packs for them. But overwhelmingly, the packs that they smoked had the labels on them. They recalled the image correctly, so we did an unprompted recall where we asked them to describe what your warning label had. And they would say, like, I had the crying woman, or I had the one of the guy with the I quit shirt that everyone can't stand, or the teeth, or whatever. So they could correct this at a pretty high rate from an unprompted recall. They said it was easy. They recommended the study to again, or would have participated again. In fact, we only had to recruit about 20 people because about 10 came from referrals. So overall, this worked quite well. On some of the outcomes, we actually found from baseline to follow-up some significant increases in their worry about the health harms of smoking, significantly increased. Something called smoker prototypes is a variable that I had not used much. You all probably know more about it than I do, but you ask people, do you think smokers are sexy, cool, fun, or trashy, not fun to be around, or things that you either like or don't like, and you actually analyze them separately. And what happens is people, when their prototypes begin to go from pretty positive around smokers to switching to negative, they're more likely to make quit attempts in the near future. And we saw that the positive smoker prototypes declined, and quit intentions actually increased. Again, this is a small study, but this really was intriguing for us. We had a whole series of other variables that did not change, but almost every one of the changes was in the expected direction, and again, we're underpowered. So this made us think this might be a feasible approach too. They love to talk about this with other people. The social reactions are a thing that I know you all have done a lot of work on. We're very interested in, because when you sit down and you're smoking and you put that on the table, and other people are like, what is going on here? And people constantly would ask them about questions. And we see a little bit of the reactance where you're trying to avoid thinking about it. Overall, no one did quit smoking. The number of cigarettes smoked per day was unchanged. It did not significantly vary. It was literally just about at zero. Some people increased their smoking, some people decreased, but it all washed out. We also thought. We were worried about some of the ethical ramifications of it looking like we were buying their cigarettes, even though we gave them a study incentive and then we accompanied them and they bought. We wanted to be sure that they would have enough packs. And I said, let's test a variant where we just tell people part of the study is you have to show up with your cigarettes. We were afraid to do that study in the first round. And we thought that a lot of, as you know, 70% of smokers buy their cigarettes each day. Only 30% buy by the carton and buy in advance. And a lot of people do this because they don't want to stockpile cigarettes, and they do it very regularly. So we thought this probably won't work, and it's especially, our protocol might not work for low-income smokers because they may not be able to have the money, the wherewithal to buy and show up. And so I didn't want to hurt the generalizability. So we were dealing with these tensions of ethical issues, tensions of having studies that only work for higher income populations. So we did a pilot where we actually said, will you show up with a week's worth of cigarettes for a study and answer some questions? And we had 35 participants, we gave people $35, and 7 participants, all of them did it. They all brought it, and 6 out of the 7 were low income. And so we felt like, as we go forward, we think this protocol has good potential. So we found from our process evaluation it was feasible. We did not have high attrition at all. There was good adherence and participant satisfaction. And we saw some increases in some of the types of psychosocial variables that would be the types of variables that you would expect and want to see. And so here's the recommended pack labeling protocol that we're hoping other people will think about adopting. So first of all, you determine daily cigarette consumption. As you know, some people are half a pack smokers, some pack a day, 2 pack, et cetera. You have to figure out what that is. You then ask them to buy enough packs for whatever the deployment duration is. So if it's a 1 week later, we tend to say, can you bring 8 or 9 days worth of cigarettes with you, just in case they were to be a little bit late on the follow-up. We schedule the appointments within no more than 1 or 2 weeks apart. We apply the candidate labels to their packs, and then we provide incentives at the very end, so we're not really buying their cigarettes, so to speak. That's where we've landed as a possible pack labeling protocol. Can I pause here and just hear any reactions? I don't know if, and I'm not trying to criticize this other method of doing the computer stuff. I think it has a great role because it's really cheap and it's fast. But if the thing that's very frustrating that kind of backfired when FDA looked at, when the evidence was examined for the warning labels, there were no, I think there's only 1 study with a behavioral endpoint that's been done. Everything is just attitudes, and then it's a chicken and egg thing where people say, well, we can't see the impact of the FDA warning labels until they're out and the packs are labeled that way, and we can't do that, but we don't have the evidence to allow us to do that. So it's, what are your reactions? Yeah, Joseph.
So this is great study, nice design. One of the questions that sort of immediately went through my mind is, why not have 4 or 5 people in a control condition who don't get the labels but go through everything else? Because one of the things that would concern me is that you're paying these folks a lot of money, and you're sort of telling them what your study is about. And so, they're happy with the study, and they see where you want them to go, and all of those sorts of things. Whereas if you had a control group with no labels, even at this proof of concept, right, the social desirability or kind of explanation for these findings would be set aside, because then you can see that the control group, wasn't where the intervention groups were.
Joe, were you a reviewer too?
Sorry?
Are you a reviewer too? I'm just kidding. Because that's what reviewer 2 said. No, it's kidding.
The reviews that I get, it's very possible. I don't see this thing. No.
It's always reviewer 2. No, I think you have a great point.
We also, when we were doing this, we're under the gun because we're going to put in our TCORS application, because we're actually proposing a very large 2,000 person version of this, 1,000 in California, 1,000 in North Carolina, and with a more elaborate design. But I think you're exactly right. I think having only a sort of a treatment condition like this is not the optimal design. And in retrospect, if we could do it over, I would have done the second version where they brought the packs with them already, and I would have had a control group. I think you're right. Yeah.
So, we've already done it. We just finished doing 240 smokers.
Mm-hmm. This study with pack labeling?
Yeah, except we gave them the cigarettes, basically. Their brand.
Yeah.
Andrew,
Yeah.
worked on this.
Was this low nicotine, or you were testing warning label stuff, or?
So we found out what brand they smoke.
Yeah.
We watched them for a week smoking their own
Mm-hmm.
brand, just to get a baseline.
Yeah.
Then the following 4 weeks, we gave them their own brand with various kinds of labels,
Yeah.
and followed them for 4 weeks.
Cool.
So we didn't do thousands.
No. This is amazing. And then what were your findings? Were they
We're still analyzing. We just finished it.
Yeah. No, it's. Do you like the overall? So I feel like I'm preaching the converted a little bit. So this, very few people are doing this. Almost all in our systematic review and meta-analysis of warning label studies, almost everything is either natural observational stuff with government mandated warnings, or these. There's maybe, I want to say even maybe 1 or 2 studies that have had you label smokers' own packs. And we debated back and forth of actually buying the packs for people and providing them, but then when you look at just, Marlboro has over 30 brand style combinations. I thought we'd have to be a retailer almost, and so we wanted people to have their stuff. But I think this. We have to have behavioral endpoints, I think, in some of this work. If we're really going to build the strongest, because as many of you know from policy research, that rules can't be arbitrary and capricious. And so if it looks like FDA is doing things that don't have an evidence base behind them, you can't impose sort of restrictions on groups. Yeah.
This is really cool stuff. It makes me wonder, though, because like you said at the beginning, there's so many other things going on. There's price, for instance, in Australia, like the price of tobacco is ridiculous. But have you considered, we only can expect so much of a warning label, even with many exposures. So have you considered trying this with cessation program or with other kinds of behavioral interventions that we seem have a bit more impact on quitting?
Yeah, no, I think if you were trying to get a bigger effect, that would help do it. We mainly were trying to do a pure kind of policy type intervention, which is just what would this policy change or not? Even though we know realistically it's going on, FDA is going to have they may not have the quit now number on it. Unfortunately, they had the 1-800 quit now number, but it's looking like from the court rulings they probably won't be able to, unfortunately. But no, I agree with you. That would be the reality is if FDA goes to this. I think you would get a bigger boost if we stepped up all of these similar efforts at the time, because people are starting to think more about quitting. This would be a prime time to have more media campaigns, more cessation availability, and so forth. Going back, real quick, on the control group, one of the things we've been debating too is, and I think I was talking with Emily this morning about neutral imagery. So you have the hole in the neck person, but then you have a person of a neck, you see a picture of someone's neck. But we've debated, do you do a picture, is the control, should it be a standard text warning, or should the control be some type of image, or should we just white out the brand imagery on the front of the pack? It's thinking of the right, what did you all do as a control in your study? Or did you not have a control?
Benign messages on the side.
Benign messages.
Yeah, the text.
Yeah. So benign ones like. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said benign. Benign. Yeah.
Benign that are actually on. The graphic ones as well.
Yeah.
Pictures.
Right. Yeah. Great.
I'm just curious about your thoughts about using protocols like this to test the effectiveness of particular warning labels as opposed to testing the effects of all warning labels. So assigning people to one of 9 conditions and giving them a mixed up.
Yeah, this is actually a big debate, and we have to solve this in the next 2-3 months, because in our big study, we're trying to figure out, do we power this to say, do warning labels work or not? Or are we trying to have enough, or do we want to power it on what we think are the 3 best of the 9? Or do we try and power it all we probably can't do it individually to know the effect of each on a behavioral endpoint. But I'm with you. We really have not yet resolved this internally with our team, because everyone I've talked to who's done warning label research has found that there are a couple of them that are just really, really good, and there's like the I quit guy that has no impact and people actually hate. But we've tried to debate, do we pick a few of the best? We haven't fully resolved that. We're leaning toward maybe doing all of them just to get some data on the ones that are likely to be used. But yeah, Emily.
Have you run the power analysis or whatever? What would it take to be able to distinguish between them?
I can't remember if it's if it's like an extra 50 to 100 per condition, but these are extraordinarily time intensive because we're doing a baseline, a 2-week, a 4-week follow-up. So it ends up costing, we're doing it, we have a supplement to one of our grants that's funding this. So it's really, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but it is in the 50 to 100. In a web-based study, that would be nothing. That would be something that would take you another day or two. But in a real-world one where you're recruiting smokers when, in California where you have a 12% smoking rate, it's really hard.
Did you ever have any participants who really just didn't like the label and tried to tear it off or remove it or something?
People had. There were a couple of them that people talked, a lot about. But more of the stuff was that people talked a lot about joking about, oh, I have this label, and being just more uncomfortable, and it was more nervous laughter than actually a real serious, this really is bugging me out. A couple people said they'd have to flip it over and stuff, but it was more of, and I don't know if you all find some of that similar stuff in your work, that people were just kind of uncomfortable, but thought it was kind of such a jarring thing, because we see labels from other countries all the time, but for naive smokers seeing these for the first time, they made them kind of uncomfortable, but not serious. Yeah. Bob?
Kurt, you said it will last 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So in order to convince the courts,
Yeah.
Give data to the FDA so it can convince the courts, you need to get some evidence about a behavioral outcome, presumably quick,
Yeah.
ideally.
Yeah.
Is 4 weeks enough to expect, if you imagine the labels maybe increase quit rates by 10%, that's an extraordinarily high number over a year. Is 4 weeks going to give you enough basis which might quit?
We're basically on the bubble on our power calculation, and there are almost no. We struggled. It was one of the absolute hardest. The ethical issues and the power issues were the two hardest in figuring this out, because there aren't great things that we could power this on. And so we've looked at, we were looking at a composite index of what's called cessation behavior that's used by Dave Hammond, that pools together, did you make a quit attempt? Did you cut down by more than 1 cigarette per day, the amount you smoked on average? Or did you actually quit? So quit attempt, reduction, or successful quit. So we had that composite measure, but it's about the. It will be better evidence by far than any of the other than any of the other studies that we're aware of. But I agree, it would be great to have 6 months.
Aren't you worried about the other side of it?
Having even enough, that it won't even show anything.
And so then the FDA has to say, well, the available data says these graphic warning labels don't work.
Yeah, no, that is a possibility. When you look though at it's just the meta-analysis systematic review we've done, graphic warning labels have such superiority to some of the text-based or the control conditions that I feel optimistic we'll see something, and we're optimistic we saw something here. But again, this is within groups pre-post rather than between groups, which is much harder to find an effect on. But we're cautiously optimistic, but I hear what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah, we're gonna be doing a pilot in about 2 months, where we're gonna begin to get better effect sizes, and I can't remember if we're doing it with 40 or 50 people. So, yeah, Karen.
So it's very cool. So how would I wasn't aware of this composite smoking behavior outcome. So how do you biochemically verify that?
It's self-reported. We're not having biochemical in this one.
If you think there may be reductions in smoking, could you consider using cocaine before and after, or something that, just because we know that there's the domain characteristics and smokers may not be reliable in their reports? Yeah,
we debated that. I would maybe like to talk to you offline about how, in a study of 2,000 people, how much that would cost in doing that, because we're doing that in a study with Michelle Kegler, and I think it's definitely worth considering.
Is your analysis before or after, or is there a control group?
Yeah, there's a control group. Yeah.
Just what they get.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, one more, and then I want to
Just
go
one
to the
question
next.
about the timing of the study. Will you try to avoid periods of times when campaigns from CDC or legacy will be on the air?
We we're kind of locked in given our period, but also since we have a control group too, they'll have the same sort of effects of history. So, but yeah, it is kind of amazing with FDA launching these big campaigns. But in some ways, this has been the thing that the good thing from a tobacco control standpoint that we're seeing multiple things going on. But hopefully, we'll be able to see the effect over and above what's happening in the secular condition of the control group. So Google search query surveillance, and the idea is, how can we use Google search query volume to help in public health issues? And there's a program it used to be called Google Insights for Search. It would tell you what the search volume is on a keyword that you could input on the website. And then it's now called Google Trends, and it's free, and it tells you how often this term is searched, either worldwide, the US, you can pick a country, you can pick a state, and so forth. And it's absolutely fascinating. It's been used a lot in health studies, and it started with flu trends and infectious disease surveillance. And the study I'll mention here, we think is the first study it was used for non-infectious disease. And we know that about 5%, a study by Eisenbach showed about 5% of all search queries are health related. So when you look at you may say, oh, that's small, but actually when you look at the total volume of search queries, that's actually pretty big. So over 6 million health related searches every day, and it's gone up substantially since that. This, some of you have seen this. This is the flu levels based on, CDC has a whole reporting system from doctors' offices that gets at influenza rates. And you can see that in the red. So over time from 2004 to 10 in red, there's spikes here. Of course, we know these spikes are occurring in winter months. And then some years are stronger than others, and so forth. And then when you do the search and lay it in green, it's a little bit hard to see, but the one thing that you can pretty much see is that overall, this is tracking at a pretty high rate. And you may say, well, who cares? We already have the other CDC system. But the Google one, you get the data within hours. The CDC one is lagged by 2 to 3 weeks. And there are multiple examples. If you go to the Google website and watch a video, they'll show a spike that will have occurred in search. And they'll say, boom, there is an outbreak occurring in New York State, a big flu thing. And a week will go by, and CDC's MMWR will say, nothing's happening there, nothing's happening. Then 2 weeks, they're like, oh my God, 2 weeks ago, there was something bad. So they were doing a great job in predicting flu. There's one for dengue fever now, so forth. You can explore flu trends. Here's again sort of the geographic component. You can see if flu activity, it's big. Looks like in the Soviet Union and Ukraine. No, but maybe we're getting back at no. But it's low in Australia, so that's good for you. Now, some of you may have seen that article in Science that was just last week showing that this big data algorithm has some flaws in it. And it really, right here in this one period, Google estimated more than double CDC's estimate. So it had been very tight fitting. And then it kind of fell apart right here. And then they have, this article is just a fascinating article, a cautionary tale, a little bit about some of the big data and what are some of the things we need to know, how they're a work in progress, how the algorithm has now been changed to kind of fix some of these problems. But we need to keep being mindful of it. But that said, there's still some sort of great things on it. You all do some work on Twitter, I know, from Joe and others, and looking at how we can take things on self-reported salvia use, some of these drug use, and you can begin to see some trends using these other techniques that are correlating somewhat well. It's not as good as the search query stuff, but it's correlating somewhat to some of the self-reported measures that we hear about 1 and 2 years later. With the flu stuff, I said we have quick reporting on this. There's much more lagged when CDC says, oh, the smoking rate for 2011 or 2012. But this stuff, it used to be able to get it a day old when we first started this work. So you could look at the Twitter searches, the Google search queries from yesterday. There was a whole bunch of stuff going on with stock pricing that people were making a fortune looking at spikes in searches for various stocks and buying those stocks and then short selling. There a bunch of stuff started happening. Google now put a mandated like 2-day or 3-day cooling off period. So then now it's lagged, but still, the fact that the search query data is only a few days old is still pretty impressive. Here's another one too, where you can also overlay some of the news stories from an interesting article from RTI. But this is one of my favorite ones. This is about searches for depression type terms. And so you can type things like "life is not worth living" or "I'm feeling blue" or "sad" and stuff like that. So you aggregate these depression queries, and you look in Australia, in the United States, I'm sorry, and you look at what the temperature is. That's what's plotted over here in red. And so when the temperature is up, that's the summer, temperature drops in winter, up summer, down winter. What do you notice? It's the exact opposite, that when it's winter, when it's cold temperatures, these depression queries are spiking, and it's almost the exact reverse of each other. It's kind of amazing, all these sort of depressed, I think the search queries are now starting to stop here in Philadelphia because it's been so warm the last day or two, but, and then you see the exact flipped pattern in Australia. So, one for you. So you see that, because of being the different equator, you see a different pattern. They actually show a dose response based on the equator, 10 degrees up, et cetera, and that you see the effect gets stronger and stronger and stronger the higher up you get. And so it's kind of fascinating, the ability to track some of these sort of health-related queries. And I'll show you at the very end, we've created a distress index by looking at people typing in distress words on Google to track. It's kind of like a misery index. And we track this distress index to see how, how certain things are faring. This was kind of interesting, where someone was plotting Google, some Google searches related to actual disease incidence and doing like a scatter plot. And one of the things is that clearly people are searching for a lot more information on breast cancer over and above. And you see this graph a bunch of times if you actually look at like NIH funding and disease rates, like breast cancer. So there's amazing interest. But there's certain areas here, like lung cancer, prostate cancer, that aren't generating some of the attention relative to the disease burden. All right, I didn't know how to get rid of these funny images, so I'm going right to that one. I already did that. So for my techie stuff, I wish I knew how to do that. But at any rate, we're seeing, can you actually predict consumer behavior? So a lot of the stuff, some of the stuff is about disease and stuff, but can we actually predict search query volume? There's a great study done by Goel that was in PNAS that looked at Yahoo data, and they wanted to see, could we actually predict box office revenue, what video games are going to be popular, what's going to be on the Billboard 100 hits. And they took what people were searching in to see if they could predict it. And you could say, well, we already know that if Julia Roberts is in a movie, it's going to make a lot of money. But they actually did some predictions too, where they actually built in all of the normal revenues of the past box office revenues, a whole series of other predictors that are commonly used, and to see if they could enhance prediction by looking at search queries. Here's for Transformers 2, the time to release and the amount of sort of search volume that was occurring, the number of 10 days, 20 days, a month out, not much was going on, but pretty high here. Tom Clancy's game, Flo Rida's song, Right Round, and you saw how well the Billboard ranking was predicting search. And so they were able to tell pretty well. These are some scatter plots where you're looking at the amount of money, predicted revenue, and the amount predicted revenue and actual revenue. And so they're actually doing a pretty good job. They were controlling for sequels and non-sequels. And they were also, their ability to predict like a week out, 2 weeks out, it gets better and better. But still, in many cases, 4 to 6 weeks out, they were predicting with fairly good accuracy what movies and songs were going to do really well based on consumer searches online, which I think is a very pretty fascinating thing. We were interested in cigarette, since I'm a policy person, what about cigarette tax hikes? When Obama signed in the S-chip tax to fund children's health insurance, it was the largest federal excise tax in history, 62 cents. And we also were looking at, could we replicate this with the impact on individual state ones. And so we thought there just simplistically maybe two reactions a smoker could have. One, they could search for information about quitting smoking. We'll call those cessation queries. So quitting smoking, the nicotine patch, bupropion, whatever they're going to, a whole series of queries like that. But they also might try and evade it, type in words like tax evasion or Native American cigarettes because they can buy tax-free or duty-free cigarettes and so forth. So we wanted to pit, what are the reactions? Are we going to see spikes in any of these searches when the prices go up? And we're looking at relative search volume, which is scaled to the peak number. So at the time, what happens is, as you know, internet use is growing, and so you can't do the raw number of hits because for things that are just staying a flat 1% of searches, it would look like it's going way up. So it's scaled against the period that had the highest percentage of search volume. This is the US. In blue, we're looking at quit smoking queries that we've aggregated from 2008 here to 2010. And this is the S-chip tax when it hit. Okay? So we're seeing searches for quitting smoking here. They're spiking here and here. We looked, that's New Year's. So every New Year's, there's a quit resolution that people are making and they're typing in. There's a micro trend, not very visible here, but every Monday, people search, there's a spike in search queries on Google for quitting smoking, losing weight, and about 40 other things, getting a mammogram. All the cancer and health-related stuff occurs on Mondays. And so we saw this, but this S-chip tax, the cessation interest queries, actually exceeded the New Year's peaks. Shaded behind is Canada. You can barely see it, I apologize. But they were seeing a same New Year's spike, but they were seeing no spike at all during the S-chip time. And then we looked at cheap cigarettes and all the other evasion queries, and those spiked even more. So what happens is they went up 366%, and then they stayed higher permanently, 60% higher. And we actually concluded that we think that when the prices go up, there was a decent amount of evasion of people searching, and we don't know if they bought. We're presuming that the search queries are related to behavior, and we're trying to validate that, but that was sort of concern. This was replicated at the state level, where we looked at a tax hike here, that when New York raised its taxes, evasion queries also spiked and stayed up high. This is when S-chip, so this one occurred before S-chip. You see a similar pattern in Florida. And this is just plotting the trends in a couple of the New York, the US, or Florida. And we're seeing that the evasion queries were going up more than during the implementation period, or really right the week before or after. Yeah.
Those are relative to their own, so it's not evasion compared to cessation. It's evasion compared to evasion.
This, when we plot, my understanding is that when you're yeah, we are plotting. Well, actually, no. There are more terms for quit. There is more search. There is a higher. Let's see. My understanding is that it's actually a higher search volume is occurring for the one that's higher. Even though they're both scaled, the 100 peak was here, but that I'm going to check with John on that. It's a really good point. We did a thing, and the reason I say that is there's a trick that you can use to get the actual number of searches, which is pose like you want to buy a Google AdWord, because they won't tell you what the search is. And so we went at one of these points and said, we'd like to buy the search word like quitting smoking and so forth. And Google said, you're going to spend $800 on that because it costs like 3 cents per hit, and there's going to be X thousand hits that you'll get. Or we added it up, and and we have the excess number in the article of how many hundreds of thousands or millions of extra hits, because we did it, and it was high. I'm pretty sure it was higher for these terms than these terms. But I'm gonna check on that and get back to you. There are some limitations, which I'll conclude at the end. Not knowing the actual search volume is a little bit messy. E-cigarettes, you all know what e-cigarettes are, but we wanted to see what are the trends in search queries on Google. We did the study right at the, in the middle of 2010, and we looked at a whole series of FDA-approved products that have been on the market for a decade or more, like like nicotine replacement therapy. We looked at Chantix and other cessation medications. We looked at snus. We also looked a little bit at dissolvables and some other products because there was great concern. There's concern about what is going to take off. We predicted in 2010 that electronic nicotine delivery system queries or e-cigarette queries were spiking like crazy. They're now up 250% from even these values. They have continued to soar. So and I have all kinds of colleagues who did grants on dissolvables. They said it's going to be dissolvables. E-cigarettes a fad. They're going to die. I talked to tons of researchers who said the smokers don't like e-cigarettes. Don't bother doing any more e-cigarette studies. And we said, no, we really think consumers are really, really interested a lot in these. More so, they took over in 2009, more so than every other smoking alternative or every other FDA-approved medication. We looked in states that have higher, stronger clean indoor air laws that ban smoking. You're likely to see more e-cigarette search queries in those states than states with weak laws. We also did a little study in North Carolina which banned smoking in bars and restaurants, and we actually saw an increase in the number of cessation queries in North Carolina. So right after a state goes to a clean indoor air law, we see spikes, of course. So we see spikes in the amount of sort of cessation queries. Final project I would mention is just this, the Great Recession, where we looked at distress queries like symptoms of anxiety, depression, et cetera. And not surprisingly, when you plot over 2009 to 10, the distress queries get higher around the time of the Great Recession. So this kind of misery index, and we plotted it against that. We also wanted to see what is it that's most correlated to the pattern of distress queries. So we looked at leading economic indicators, the stock market performance, housing values, unemployment rates, and foreclosures. And what we actually found is the closest level of prediction is the foreclosure rate, which almost no one had reported on. And we think that, and I've talked to I presented to a group in medicine, and the psychiatrists all said, my patients who've been unemployed, they're unhappy, but when they're foreclosed on, it's absolutely devastating. It's one of those grueling things. And so this, from a housing policy and economic policy, it's really distressing. We wrote a bit about what happened with TARP and how we spent some money bailing out some of these big industries, but not doing enough on foreclosures. And we think from a public policy standpoint, we'd like to see this replicated in other realms, but we think that there's some possibility there. So the nice advantage of this web approach, it's free, they're rapid, it's easy to collect, and especially for stigmatized and private behaviors. John Brownstein at Harvard did a great study on people searching for abortion information. In states that ban it, the search queries are way higher. Countries that make it illegal, way higher. And so you look at things that people are kind of stigmatized on, searching for buying cigarettes illicitly and so forth. You can't link it to the demographics or behavior of the searcher. So we don't know men or women, low income, high income. We don't know that. We know a little bit about the geography, but there are times when, if you're studying Justin Bieber, you could find all kinds of great stuff and get level probably at the Philadelphia level, or certainly at the state level. But there are times when you punch in an esoteric product like menthol cigarettes or something that you may not be able to get enough data on. So there's some pros and cons of this search query surveillance method, but I just wanted that sort of concludes the second part of what I wanted to talk about, which is search query surveillance. So yeah, let me take your questions.
Earlier, the original study you guys did with the 30 people, that was just in North Carolina, right?
Correct.
So what was your reason for choosing California as your other state for your bigger 2000?
It more is that the group that we're working on with data collection, PIRE, has an office in California and North Carolina. So we're going to work. We wanted to do another outside of North Carolina state, and we thought that would. They have a couple of offices, different places, but we just wanted something that was pretty different than North Carolina, a tobacco growing state with a pretty high smoking rate. So we wanted to have something slightly more generalizable. Ideally, we would do it in lots of places, though. Yeah, Emily.
Can you clarify a little bit about the disadvantage of can't link to demographics or other behavior? Because I thought that there were sort of decent proxies for a lot of those kinds of things built into the Google algorithm and other kinds of, I mean, maybe not for free, but for somewhat, relatively speaking, low cost, to be able to at least target, if not tailor?
Yeah, so Google and other advertisers know a lot about that, and so they, and that's why you get these sort of context-dependent ads and such. But for someone who uses the Google Trends interface, it's not available. It's not available to you. But yeah, no, I do think if you're an insider at Google, I do think you often, and the trick is, of course, a computer that's shared among many people. But in general, and you all know a lot more about this than I do. I'm trying to remember what the name of the company was, but they have 800 variables, and they track, like, are you interested in sports? There's like 40 on sports, like, do you like hockey, football? And they rate IP addresses on this. Everything from types of food you like to search for, whether you search for pornography or not, what sports you like, what news, and whether you like dogs or cats. Like, they have and they sell this to advertisers. Do you all know what I'm talking about? The name of the company. There's a company that was that sold that collected all this data, and they do it based on search visit or based on website browsing habits. But I think a lot of these other people know this, but they won't let us have it from there.
So I guess the real question is, from a policy standpoint, if we assume that disadvantage goes away, right, that there is a way to get this, that Google has it, that other people have it, that maybe if you're willing to pay a little bit, you can have it. What are the kinds of things that then would be at the top of your list as a policy guy for what you'd want to go after?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested. I'm really troubled by the fact that even though we've had great reductions in smoking rates and tobacco use rates, we're seeing disparities either exacerbate or just stay flat, and we need a full court press on people who disadvantaged populations. And so I would love to build a segment and say, what is it, and how, who's reacting, like, for instance, who's reacting to searching information about quitting smoking is, if I stratified low income, high income, middle income, for instance, am I seeing that the search query, the information seeking is different by SES level, for instance? We have another, I have a couple of studies just in the slides behind us where we're doing stuff on searching for information when celebrities get cancer, and we've been tracking that. I'd like to know the gender of the person, but we did a study where we showed that when you search for pancreatic cancer among 26 celebrities, when you get it and you plot it, only 2 matter: Patrick Swayze from Dirty Dancing and Steve Jobs. And we see gigantic effects of cancer search, and it's predictable. There's a 2-part spike. Part 1 is diagnosis, so Patrick Swayze diagnosed, Steve Jobs diagnosed, and then there's a predictable one when they die. And so if you want to give cancer information to people, and celebrities diagnosed and they have a pretty serious cancer, it'd be a matter of time, and we could be preparing a whole series of ads and so forth that could appear alongside news stories and such, and really reach audiences. And we're not doing that very well, actually. And if we could segment better, we did another thing on Angelina Jolie too. And if you look just at the term Angelina Jolie, there's a ton of spikes of that. Everything from every child she's adopted, to every movie she's been in, to when she showed her leg at the Oscars, which is the second highest thing. But the number one thing is when she wrote that editorial about her bilateral prophylactic mastectomy. And so we're tracking what celebrities and cancer, what kind of searches happen there, and knowing. I'd love to know, because a number of people are searching for inappropriate treatment options. And I like to verify data. These low-income women, high-income women, are they women versus men? I mean, are the guys searching for a spouse? So that would open more up. Yeah. Great. Anyone here do Google search stuff? Is anyone doing search query a little bit? Interest? Yeah. Yeah. It's fun stuff.
Especially when we're trying to choose words for surveys, for example, e-cigarette and vape pen, and all those things came up. Okay, well, which ones are getting the most Google searches?
Yeah, actually, literally right before I gave this talk, I did a quick search on my phone, and if you look at e-cigarettes, as I was saying, it's up 250% from when we did the study. It's just gone straight up. Vape pen just started in about 2013. Late 2012, and it just is astronomical. It's like triple the trajectory of e-cigarettes. So, but that it is great because then it says related search terms and it plots all of those other terms. So I think it's, as long as we begin to do more and more work in this area, I think we're going to learn more and has implication for campaigns.
The search for cheaper cigarettes translates into behaviour for purchases.
There's so my colleague John Ayers is doing a thing where he's tracking search queries about quitting, and then he's linking it to quit attempts based on BRFIS state level data. And so he's trying to build where you're taking because BRFIS has monthly data collection, as many people know. And so when you have pairs of 50 states times monthly data collection over 7, 8, this only goes back to around 2004. You can track, and so he's building lines to see if he can predict smoking rates based on search queries, because they're able to predict, dengue. They're able to predict suicides in Asia. I don't know if you've seen, there've been a whole series of studies, and the researchers are saying you're going to start seeing suicide clusters occurring very shortly, because we're seeing spikes in suicide terms in Asia, and then boom, boom, boom. They've been not as strong a prediction as flu trends, but they're able to predict this stuff. So it's, I think from a big data and a public health informatics standpoint, we really need to be doing more and more work in this area and understanding it, but yeah. Yeah, great. Thank you all.
Thanks very much.